I'm James Swanwick. Welcome to the Alcohol Free Lifestyle Podcast, where you learn to live a life of health, wealth, love, and happiness. From a life-ending boating accident to prison to redemption. Today we are speaking with a new friend of mine by the name of Keir Weimer, who was just 23 years old when he was the driver in a boating accident that took the life of a beautiful young woman. Keir had been drinking and spent 3.5 years in prison for vehicular manslaughter. Since then, he's now turned his life around. He has a purposeful life. He's alcohol free, and we're going to dig in a little bit to his incredible story in today's conversation, which for me feels a little more sensitive than others. But Keir assures me that we can go there and we can talk about what happened. And I really want to acknowledge him for his courage and bravery to talk about this issue. Keir, great to have you with us, mate.
Yeah, pleasure to be here, and grateful for the opportunity to chat with you. And it's been great to get to know you a bit over the last year or so.
Yeah, just before we get into your story, you and I are in a business mastermind together, aren't we? We're kind of like, it's like personal development for men, it's entrepreneurship for men. What has been your experience in that community so far?
Yeah, it's been pretty awesome. I've been a member for about 8 or 9 months, been to a few events, met some pretty extraordinary people, including yourself, and had some awesome experiences and adventures. So yeah, it's been, important for me post-COVID, really been leaning into community and developing relationships and getting, back to that after not having a lot of that during those first few years of the pandemic.
Yeah. And just tell us a little bit about your life now. What do you do? How old are you? Where do you live?
Sure. Yep. I just turned 40 last year. I live and reside between a few different places, Manhattan, New York City, as well as upstate New York. I have a place, and then spend a lot of time in the mountains of upstate New York, the Adirondacks. It's a big state park, beautiful area. I just really love the outdoors, feel most at home in the mountains. And I currently fully focused on running a business called Weekender. We own and operate adventure-based independent hotels throughout the North. It's real fun and aligned with my personal values of growth and adventure, the great outdoors, nature, travel, and it allows me to also lean into the other side of business with finance, markets, and capital and all that. So it's been really fun. Started a few years ago and did some other stuff to arrive here. Right, we always have a journey that's not usually a straight line, and I'm glad to be where I am now, kind of focused fully on growing Weekender.
You're a guest on my podcast, the Alcohol Free Lifestyle Podcast, in which we help people to have a better relationship with alcohol. Take us back 17 years now, I guess. You were 23 years old, as I understand it, and you were out with some friends, and this tragic event occurred. Take us back to that day, that night, and tell us what happened.
hmm Yeah, I was a senior at Syracuse University, the college I went to for undergraduate, and I was 23 at the time, going to my last semester, and I was up in the place I call home that I mentioned earlier, the Adirondack Mountains. I was with 5 of my friends at the time, and also my brother. My brother ended up staying back because he was in high school, and my friends and I went out on the family boat to go to a restaurant and bar where they play live music. Again, it was July, summertime. We had gone there to eat and had definitely been drinking and listening to some music, having a great time, fun time, seemingly innocent night. And after that, we decided to go home around 12:30. Out of all of us, thought that I was in the best shape to get us home and drive home. I had been drinking throughout that evening, and my ability and judgment were definitely impaired. We got out into the lake. A couple of my friends had to use the bathroom, the girls, and so I wanted to get us home. I normally go really slow at night because that's the prudent, safe thing to do. This night, I did not choose to do that because of that reason, and ended up getting my bearings, or so I thought, and It had been raining that day and it was dark, not a lot of moonlight, and the kind of the shoreline blended in with the sky. So it's really hard to get your bearing to see how far out in the water you were from land. And I stepped on the throttle. The boat comes up and then starts to plane out. And at that point, about 4 or 5 seconds into that process, we were headed right toward an island in the middle of the lake, and it was too late to change course or slow down. And we came ashore, hit the island, went 40, 50 feet inland. And my girlfriend at the time, her best friend was ejected and ended up dying immediately to blunt force trauma to the head. All my other friends were very seriously injured and hospitalized, and I went through the windshield, and it was about the most horrific scene that you can imagine. And I won't really go into much graphic detail other than that. It was absolutely horrible to go from a night of kids thinking they're having fun without a worry in the world or a care or concern for tragedy, just instantly, ending, and a life ending, and everybody else, affected forever and not knowing really what to do. And as a result, I ended up, being charged with numerous crimes as I should have been. I was driving the boat. I had been drinking, was under the influence, and was speeding. And so I was charged with manslaughter as well as vehicular manslaughter and a few other things. And I ultimately ended up pleading guilty to that original charge of vehicular manslaughter because I knew that I was guilty. I was operating the boat under the influence, was speeding, and it did result in somebody, losing their life and passing away. So I was facing about 15 years in prison at the time. I was out on bail, going through the court process, not knowing how to cope or deal, total, lack of emotional, maturity skills or anything. Was suicidal for a few days right after the accident, and was in a really, really dark, tough spot personally, not knowing how to handle that kind of an event, the emotion of it, the guilt, the shame, the processing of that, the finality of it, and was getting a bunch of counseling and trying to figure out how to handle and cope with that, and also knowing I was staring down a lot of time in prison at a young age, and I didn't know how to handle that or prepare for that, right? So it was very, very challenging time. Fast forward to when I was 24 or so, 24 and a half now, a year and a half almost through this court process, I was ultimately going to trial for this and ended up pleading guilty, right before that, through a plea agreement with my friend who passed away, her family, and with the prosecutor's office. And I ended up getting sentenced to, 6 years in state prison. So I took responsibility for my actions in the crime and was taken away in handcuffs that day, and very, very painful and tough because, again, I had no idea how to operate in this world. And prison is a very, very tough, dark world of survival. And I had to learn quickly how to move, how to adapt, how to cope. And I did that. And then I went on to serve just under 4 years, 3.5 to be precise, in there. And it was, the accident, the aftermath in prison was the hardest thing I have ever and likely will ever go through. And it taught me a lot about self-reliance, forgiveness, perseverance. It took me about a year being away to even realize that I actually had an alcohol problem. you know, I was being told and was telling myself, right, that this was an accident that could have happened to anybody. And I was, right, and minimizing the fact that I actually was the sole 100% responsible party for somebody no longer being here, and I had to come to that realization through a year of being alone and away and without freedom or identity or any of the comforts of life. It took me 6 months of, inpatient rehab in there. I never had rehab or alcohol or addiction education ever. It took that for me to realize, holy shit, like this wasn't just a isolated thing or event. Like I had a lot of behaviors and problematic relationships with alcohol, a little bit of drugs, but mostly alcohol, right, for years leading up to this. So was not just a freak event. It was avoidable. It was preventable. And I just didn't see the writing on the wall and the warning signs and the flags, until it was too late. And, as we realize, right, people that struggle with alcohol and drug addiction, that sometimes it takes, different levels of a bottom, right, for us to really, really wake up and realize that, holy shit, I can't live like this anymore. And oh my God, like I have only myself to blame. And oh my God, I'm in the way of actually living a fulfilling, productive, contributive, happy life. And it was that moment of realization for me in prison. Where I was literally crying, like that proverbial on your knees, kind of trying to understand life and your place in it. And I just finally took responsibility for it. I forgave myself, and I committed to living a better life, starting with being sober. So that was like the lowest point that I fell to. And then from there on, which was in sometime at the end of 2008, every day has been just a little bit better than next, just doing the next right thing, building upon prior wins, strengthening myself emotionally, physically, mentally, emotionally, all those different areas. And I'm just really grateful for, you know, what has happened since then, what I've built since then, and also who, most importantly, who I've become since then.
There's a lot to unpack there. Thank you for sharing. Just to take me back to the night. When were you knocked out? Were you unconscious? Were you conscious the whole time? Like, when did you kind of realize the magnitude of what had happened?
When I was in the police station, at 3 or 4 a.m., cuffed, and I was told that, she was no longer with us and had passed away. It wasn't until then that I actually knew that she was no longer there and the totality of what happened.
And what was that experience like? What were you feeling or thinking when you were told that?
Just a little bit of disbelief and not accepting it, you know, um, doubting that that was actually true. How could that happen? We were just all together having fun. So it took a while for that to actually sink in. And then it was really like crazy devastating, like un unspeakable feelings of irreversibility, right? Like, holy shit, how did this happen? And there's no coming back from this. And she's not here.
What were your injuries?
Very minimal. For some reason, drivers of these accidents get into the least amount of injury. I think there's a theory behind that. Subconsciously, when you hit impact or something and you're about to have trauma, that you kind of like grip and tense. And I think that holding onto the wheel or tensing your body or whatever, right, prevents a little bit of the injury from, kind of inflicting itself on the driver. But it's really crazy and sad that the person that's most responsible and that is guilty of these accidents is often the one that, is the least injured.
What were the injuries of your surviving friends?
Um, my girlfriend at the time, broken collarbone, was hospitalized for a few days. My other two friends were checked into the hospital, but I think checked out within 24 hours. I was not admitted because I just had some stitches and a little bit of glass, hitting the windshield, but I was fine. And then my friend who passed away, Tiffany, her boyfriend at the time, was also hospitalized, but I think released that night or the next day.
How did your girlfriend react or respond in the days after the accident?
I think she was in shock too. I think she had no idea how to handle this news or cope or accept it. Um, she also ended up ending a relationship a few days after. Um, I, you know, surmise due to family pressure. Um, and then that was really rough for me because, again, I was now further alone, I felt, and without anybody to really go to other than my family, who I leaned on heavily and was the reason I was able to make it through this. My mom, my dad, and my brother.
Hmm. May I just invite you to come closer to the microphone as well? It's the audio quality is considerably better when you're a little bit closer. Thank you, appreciate that.
Yep.
So your girlfriend essentially broke up with you, ended the relationship a few days afterwards, and you surmise probably to family pressure. And so that, as you said, must have felt incredibly isolating for you.
Yep, it was.
Have you had communication with your then girlfriends since that incident? And how has that gone, if so?
No, we haven't since really at that point because I believe there was a court gag order to speak, and then I was also sued by her and her family. So that was kind of the end of the relationship and communication.
Yeah. And how do you feel about that looking back? Does it seem understandable? Do you have any level of resentment or sadness or anything about that? Like how have you processed that part of the incident?
Yeah, I think that took me a little while to process and come to terms with, but I don't hold any ill will or lack of closure. Frankly, I think that was exactly what should have happened. And as hard as it was at the time, it was, you know, um, probably exactly what needed to happen.
The family of the woman who lost her life, what communication did you have with them in the days immediately after the accident and then subsequently?
Almost none whatsoever because I didn't know them. And I only had known her for a few weeks through my girlfriend, who was good friends with her. So there was
Sure.
no communication at all until I got out and several, maybe 3, 4 years later when she contacted me.
Okay. I'll ask you about that in just a little bit. Your own family, what, and your friends and your existing friends at that time, what was their response, behavior, reaction to what had happened?
I think again, disbelief. Um, just how do you process something like that with that kind of finality, you know, with that kind of tragedy and with that kind of severity? I think you also find out who are your true supporters who will see you through thick and thin, high and low, even despite a horrible decision that resulted in a horrible tragedy, because those people knew that it was not intentional, that it was still, while avoidable and preventable, was not something done with malice or malintent or a desire to harm. So I think I really found out who were my true friends that were there for me no matter what. And it was family and close friends and some of the others that were there for the lifestyle or the whatever. They fell off pretty quickly, and it was pretty clear to see, where people fell.
Mm. And do you see that now as just human behavior and you understand it, or do you look at it as, wow, that's a sad part of human behavior or psychology, if you will?
A little bit of both. It was harder like initially, right? You're younger in the moment. I think time heals a lot. So I don't really carry any unresolved ill will or resentments toward, you know, anyone for however they reacted or didn't react or handled the situation because it was so hard and unique and different. And there is no right or wrong way to go through or to react or to, grieve or have your own process, right, with something like this.
Just moving the conversation now to the uh, court system, I guess, and the sentencing. I guess you probably were advised that you were going to serve some prison time,
Yep.
and that was probably what, an 18-month process to figure out until you figured out how much time you were going to serve, or what was the time between knowing you were going to jail and actually going to jail?
I knew I was going the whole time, so it was the 15 months of like facing down this, train coming at you, not knowing how to handle it or dodge or go through it, other than just to submit your will to the next chapter.
Mm.
Yeah.
And what was that like? Those 15 months, like, how did you prepare mentally and maybe, I don't know, physically, maybe going for prison? Like, how does someone prepare to go to prison knowing that's what's happening?
I didn't. They don't. There's no recipe or playbook, and if there was one, I didn't have it. Um, so I did not prepare well. I was not in a good place when I went in, and it took time away and time in there for me to harden my resolve and commitment to, a rebirth, if you will, a new way of living, um, and a new identity that took a lot of hard work. and it really didn't start until day one when I was in there.
Which prison did you go to? And just maybe describe the circumstances around that. Like what's the prison like? Like from as being as specific as what kind of cell do you have to were you sharing it with someone to was it maximum security, minimum security?
Yeah, it was all the above. It's a pretty horrible place, but the darkest place you can think of. I was in a number of medium and maximum security prisons throughout the New York State system, sharing some 8 by 6 foot cells, bunk beds with a toilet and a sink with people in for murder, in for life, 30 years to life. Um, Sharing in big open barracks with sex offenders and people in for larceny, drugs, murder, violent crimes, assault, robbery, you name it. So it was a full basket of, um, people and backgrounds. And it was a pretty scary place. I had several incidents where there was extortion attempts, there was, violence threatened. I nearly avoided, you know, getting stabbed actually once. I had some interactions with gangs. I had to find ways to move and survive and link up with the right people to protect my, you know, personal sovereignty, if you will. Um, and I, as a result, became very self-reliant and resourceful. Was able to learn skills of, survival and independence and relying on yourself and building your mind and your emotional strength and also your physical strength through working out every day so that I could kind of hold my own, in this really violent, tough world.
How does one figure out who's a friend and an ally and who's an enemy when you go into prison?
By trusting no one, figure that out in hindsight. Yep. You really can't trust anybody. That's the sad reality of it.
Did you find that you trusted certain people and they completely and utterly betrayed your trust, and then you have to go to another group of people and trust them, and then they betrayed your trust? Like how do you trust anyone if everyone's untrustworthy?
Yeah, you literally trust yourself to be a survivalist or not, right? It's like, are you going to be a survivor and figure out a way to work through this, or are you going to let it consume you in two lives and not have a chance to do some good in the world when you get out? That's the decision point. That's the fork in the road you're in when you're in there. And most people, unfortunately, choose the path of least resistance, which is not working on themselves, not growing, not learning, not taking responsibility for why they're there. And that's why they end up right back there.
Why were you in a maximum security prison? Can you just explain that? Because I would have thought that manslaughter, vehicular manslaughter, wasn't worthy of maximum security
Yeah, it's
prison.
just the nature of crime classification in the state of New York. It's still a violent crime because somebody did lose their life. So even if the intent wasn't there.
Got it. Got it. May I ask what was the lowest point of your prisoner life and what was the highest point, if there could be one, or maybe a better way of saying that is like the least horrible moment of prison life? So if there's if there's a spectrum, right? What was like the darkest, worst moment that you had in prison, and what was, possibly the brightest spark, I guess?
Yeah. Darkest was either the first couple nights going through intake and not seeing the end of the tunnel and losing all identity, or it was when I literally feared for my life for a few days when I thought I was going to get like ambushed and stabbed. That was pretty freaking scary. So that was probably the low. Bright point would be maybe the week after I got denied parole after 2 years and it sunk in. And then after about a week of me being very depressed and sad, I started to actually realize that there was a silver lining, which means I could see the end of the tunnel now. So
Mm,
that was a high point.
got it. Just one final question on the lowest point, and then I really want to move the conversation into, all of the incredible good that has come out of this. When you said
Yeah.
that you were fearing for being ambushed and stabbed, could you elaborate on that? What were the circumstances around that?
Yeah, it was. a bit of a there's gangs in prison, and the Bloods were a pretty strong one in New York, and word gets out usually because the guards are talking, to be honest, and people hear about a crime, or somebody's on a boat. Oh, we must have money, and then there's an extortion play because there's a lot of people looking for a way to get over or come up, if you will, or manipulate to benefit their you know goals and themselves at the expense of others. So yeah, it was an attempt to extort money, and me refusing to do so, holding my ground, and that resulting in ramifications. Let's put it that way.
Mm, got it. And thankfully, you weren't ambushed and stabbed, but the fear of that was very real, I can imagine.
Correct.
At what point of being in prison did you have the realization you're 100% responsible for your actions? That there started to be a level of insight, I guess, that was the catalyst or the spark for all of the immense good that was about to come.
Yeah, that happened, as I was touching on, about a year in, after 6 months, in their therapy program, rehab, inpatient that they mandate you to go through, and a lot of solo single nights being alone, and reflecting on what led to that night and my role in it and my behavior patterns growing up, and increasingly problematic relationship with alcohol and drugs, through high school and college, and then just having it all, the weight of it all kind of just come crashing down one night, you know,
When you say the weight of it all come crashing down, what do you mean?
just, kind of a inflection point, right? Where like finally all the evidence is in front of you and you can no longer deny it. Yeah.
And what was the evidence saying to you about alcohol in general, alcohol and drugs, and saying about you in general? Like, what was the level of insight you got about alcohol and drugs in one sense and yourself on the other?
Um, I think just seeing the connection with my usage and a predisposition to abuse, with also family history, leading to increasingly bad decisions over time, right? And linking those two and seeing there was a pattern. It wasn't just an accident, there was a common thread, right? And it was alcohol. You remove that common thread, shit gets better, right? Life gets better.
Yeah, that's certainly been the experience of our listeners who are listening to this right now, who've shared with us. When they remove alcohol, problems seem to go away. When you increase or consume alcohol, many problems can, remain. And did you get that level of insight through professional support in there? Like you mentioned a rehab program that was probably court mandated. And so you would now, in hindsight, look at that court mandated rehab as being very influential in all of the great that came along afterwards.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It was definitely a big part of it, getting just some basic education on addiction, alcoholism. It's just also, time, reflection, you know, um, just the weight of prison and the guilt. I think it was all those, it was a lot of things. I was also being, I was going to AA meetings in there. So that was helpful too, to understand it better.
So you got out. Let's talk about what happened from the point where you got out. Was there an intention from you to now live the rest of your life in a purposeful, intentional way? Did that come sometime afterwards? Like, just tell us about the circumstances, what was going on factually and I guess emotionally with you from the point where you got out of prison. I guess you got out when you were about 27. Is that right?
No, I was 29.
29. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened from that point?
Um, well, I was definitely working on the growth and the next stage plan every day after that moment of realization, right? So it was far before I got released that I was putting that plan into place, getting better emotionally, working on myself, building my health and my body up, reading hundreds of books, writing my first book when I was away on a typewriter in there, and planning the future. I was even taking, some college courses remotely to finish my degree. I got suspended when I was, in the accident. And I was taking LSAT courses and studying for a law, entry exam. My plan was to go to law school and business school when I got out as my way to reintegrate and try to start over. So yeah, I kind of hit the ground running when I got out. I think I was ready to go. And I did just that. I, applied to all these schools and ended up getting denied from all of them. So the world universe had a different plan for me. So did not do that. And I had to figure out what was my next step. If I can't go back to school, nobody's going to give me a chance. Couldn't get a job, was on parole, broke, living at home, no car, no license, curfew. It was rough. So another wall of shit. Where do you go from here? I was 30 at that time, and I decided to what am I good at? Well, I don't know yet. What I go to school for, business. What have I had interest in? Always real estate. Okay, how does somebody start there? Get licensed. So I got licensed, and I started to you know build a real estate brokerage business practice in the same area where this accident happened, which everybody thought I was crazy for going back there in the small town and seeing if people would give me a chance. And a lot of people didn't, but just enough did. And, took me about a year and change to sell that first property and went $40,000 into debt. Was about to give up on myself again. Family pressure. What's going on? You got to get a real job. You're not making money. Can't live at home anymore. And then that first one sold, the next one sold, the next one. And then it was just like kind of off to the races and ended up growing really quickly and, making impact and helping people and, making money that I'd never made before. And that was pretty exciting because, again, another example of not giving up on yourself, committing to your vision, for something bigger and working, relentlessly toward that. And that was kind of the theme of working through all these walls, right? Prison, parole denial, getting out, getting denied from law schools, not making any money, almost giving up. It was just a series of these walls that were tests, right, that I had to kind of work through.
How much of your drive at that point was from making amends, maybe guilt, maybe shame, and how much of it was I've got to make an impact here just because I'm going to do this just I'm going to do this for me, I guess.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both. It was a chip on my shoulder, not wanting to just be remembered as this kid that caused this horrible accident, right? Wanting to give something else back to the world. And then part of it was a big drive of my sobriety, because I wasn't able to stick with the AA program in the sense of submitting over, my entire will to, excuse me, a higher power. I didn't grow up with a religion. I'm not very religious, admittedly, pretty spiritual, but that was tough for me. I wanted to retain at least the illusion of self will and control, right? And I knew that I had it in me to do this. So I kind of created my own system of sobriety, if you will, that was based part in wanting to pay the respect that I owed Tiffany, who's no longer here, and her memory, to not go back and live and use and have that lifestyle that led to that accident. And then the other part of the motivation was to honor the future and the chance I had to make a pretty big impact, right, and live a fulfilling, productive life. So when I took those two, that was actually a really compelling motivator for me to stay the course and to stay sober and clean. And also, obviously, the deterrent of not wanting to ever go back to prison, knowing that that was probably a distinct possibility if I kept using.
We referenced in the beginning of our conversation that Tiffany's family ultimately reconnected with you. When did that happen? What were the circumstances around that?
Yeah, that happened, like I mentioned, about 4 years after I got out. And I guess her mother had been following me, keeping track. I think I was getting some press and there were some stories and a couple TV newspaper in the news, that weren't negative like before with the accident. So I think she had seen that maybe also on social media and realized that, wow, it's not just words, right? He maybe is actually like walking the walk here and trying to live a better life and turn things around and get back. So I think it was that gave her confidence to want to reach out, and she did. And I can't even imagine how hard that was, for her to do, to this day. And we ended up meeting a few weeks later, and then we ended up speaking at a few schools, to at-risk youth and stop DWI programs, things like that. And then she had told me that she was working on passing a law in the New York State called Tiffany's Law to help prevent these accidents from happening. And I asked her if there was anything I could do to support, and she said yes. And so we ended up attending some, lobbying efforts and, meetings with the legislators rather in the legislature. And she ended up, through her persistence, getting the law passed in, I think it was 2016 or 17, which was pretty awesome because I know that she had worked on that for 7 years, and that's definitely going to help prevent these types of accidents.
Tiffany's Law.
Yep.
Amazing. What was the first phone call meeting you had with her like, and what was the first in-person meeting with her like?
Yeah, I don't know that we had a phone call. I think we just met.
You just met in person, yeah? What and how did you feel approaching that in-person meeting, and what was your experience like actually having the meeting?
Yeah, that was pretty scary, right? Leading up to it, and very anxious and not knowing how to prepare for that. And then the meeting was also very emotional and very tough and very humbling, um, but ultimately very, you know, I think rewarding and fulfilling for both of us at the end.
Yeah. Was there something that you care to share that either you said or that she said that had impact for you, that stuck with you?
Not particularly that comes to the mind at the moment, but just, other than it just being a powerful, emotional meeting, and one that was had, that feeling of, forgiveness and wanting to move forward.
And has that shown you anything about forgiveness or moving forward that you've been able to communicate to other people, friends, acquaintances, or, is there anything that you care to share about that with our listeners now about forgiveness, about moving forward?
Yeah, I think that the big, lesson or takeaway from that in my experience has been, you got to find a way to forgive yourself, or nothing else can really improve. As many mistakes and sins and harms and transgressions we usually commit, right? When we're using, um, none of that can be repaired until you actually give yourself a second chance, forgive yourself, and commit to making amends and making it better, and then doing the work.
You're a single man, as I understand it. How has it been trying to form romantic relationships since you got out of prison? In the sense that I would imagine that sharing this story would probably give some potential romantic partners pause for concern or thought. Has that been the case, and what's it been like trying to make deep, meaningful romantic connections?
Yeah, I think it hasn't really repelled people when I've been upfront and honest with it, which I always am, usually in, second or third date, right? Because I think that's important for people to know, disclose, and they can choose to react or process the information as they will and wish. I will say that, the experience I had with my girlfriend at the time, right, with being alone for so long, and then having to be and become so self-reliant, has definitely not served me in relationships and intimacy, in the sense of being a bit closed off, right? Emotionally, not always, open or willing to share as much as maybe I could or would like to. So that's definitely something I've been cognizant of more recently and been working on, and seeing if there's anything unaddressed, and other things from that, maybe unexplored, unresolved traumas, right? To be actually able and open to, receive and to give, that in an actual committed relationship.
Mm. Do I sense that what you're sharing is that it's been hard to make deep, meaningful romantic connections, not just because of maybe the response from potential partners to what happened, but maybe you've been more guarded, more closed off, not open, as receptive as you might ordinarily be?
Yep, correct. It's more of the latter.
Got it. And what therapy has been helpful that you found? What insight have you got has been helpful that's been kind of, I guess, breaking you open or opening you up more to that?
I think just working with, like a relationship coach that's really good at asking the right questions, right, and prompts. That's been helpful. Exploring the past more. Um, did some, hypnosis therapy, which was enlightening and kind of cool. So yeah, I think just being intentional about it and working on it and better understanding that my history and patterns, I think is the a good, first step and approach.
Mm. What's your view now about alcohol in general, society's obsession with it, cultural conditioning around alcohol? I mean, it's been many years now since the tragedy occurred. What's your view now on alcohol and its place in society?
Yeah, I think it's finally starting to, like be okay and be more mainstream to not drink and not imbibe to the levels we once did as a culture. I still think there's a lot of room for improvement and a big drug and alcohol problem in this country that affects so many people and then so many of their family and friends, right? As a result, everybody's touched by this problem and disease of abuse and addiction, one way or another, one pretty much one degree of separation. But I would say I'm encouraged by the shift in cultural mentality, right, and consciousness around drinking and partying, and a movement toward more of a health and wellness based mindset and more of a sober living, fully present type lifestyle.
Do you intend on drinking again? If you did, is that fine? Or are you like so fundamentally opposed to that concept now? Like what's your own view on your own consumption of it?
Yeah, I'm constitutionally opposed to it, and I never will do it again. And I haven't had a drug or a drink in, it's over what, 17 years. So yeah, that's just not part of my lexicon anymore.
Mm. And how does that feel?
Feels great. It's just not even an option or a thought or anything. It's like a non existence. It's a non thing.
When you see Super Bowl ads, billboards, television shows glorifying alcohol, does anything come up for you?
Maybe a little sadness or frustration that that still needs to happen or still is happening, right? But I also don't put a lot of time in that. Everybody is of their own free will, right? They can choose to live how they want. It's just I choose to not do that.
How does it feel to answer these type of questions about the incident, about your journey? Like, how does it feel when I'm asking you a question and you're giving the answers? Do you feel neutral? Do you feel awkward? Do you feel grateful that you get to share the story? Like, what are some of the feelings when people like me are asking you these questions?
Yeah, I'd say a little bit neutral to grateful, that I do have this sobriety and health and that I even have a chance to be here and share the story and, maybe help support or inspire somebody else to live a little differently, a little bit better, to, live a life that they're proud of and realize that we are all deserving of forgiveness and second chance. Just what society and some people make us think.
Mm. Yeah, beautiful. Well, you've certainly given uh, our listeners an incredible gift, and I thank you for that, for sharing your story. And I know it's not great subject matter at times, obviously, and you've gone through an incredible, heartbreaking journey. And my belief is that in you sharing the story, you've been able to help many of our listeners to really rewire their mindset about their own alcohol consumption. So for that, I thank you, sir.
Of course, I'm happy to share the story and be here.
Yeah, amazing. Just one final question then. What does the future hold for you? What would you like to accomplish or do in the world from this point on?
Yeah. Like I mentioned, I'm really focused on connecting people to great experiences outdoors and themselves more deeply and those around them. I think that there's a lot of health and benefit and frankly spirituality in that, right? It's getting outdoors and getting back to nature, and it can really help too with living a healthy, sober lifestyle. Also looking for other ways where I can share this story to larger audiences and inspire and help others really lean into their, full potential and to do it in a sober way. that's achievable and that's meaningful. So yeah, just one foot in front of the other, right? One day at a time, as they say, and trying to build something that I'm really proud of, and give back, and pay it forward, and share the story that I'm very fortunate and grateful to be able to share as much as I can.
Amazing. Keir Weimer, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing your story, and it's been great to get to know you more in our men's group, and long may it continue. Thanks, mate.
Of course. Great to be here. Thanks, James.
Thank you so much for listening. For more content like this, you can check out our YouTube channel at alcoholfreelifestyle.com/YouTube. You can follow me and send me a direct message on Instagram and TikTok at James Swanwick. And you can see the results of our scientific study at alcoholfreelifestyle.com/study. If you'd like to apply to become a Stop Drinking client, you can visit alcoholfreelifestyle.com/project90. I wrote a book called The 30-Day No Alcohol Challenge, which you can find on Amazon. And you can always email me directly at james@alcoholfreelifestyle.com. If you're a regular listener of the show, would you please do me a big favor and give the show a rating and a review? It helps us get more listeners, and you'll be potentially helping someone else out there who's struggling with alcohol to find us, to listen to us and get support. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.